I was thinking about this topic today. I think about a lot of, archetypes are my scholarship, and looking at our modern day mythologies and how they operate, how they affect us individually, psychologically, as I always say, and also as a culture, in society. So thinking about culture and archetypes, and this is archetypes are one of the ways that mythology affects culture, because if you trace the idea of archetypes back through Joseph Campbell, through Carl Jung, you can go all the way. I mean, heck, you can go all the way back to Platonic forms in a certain matter if you want to, but it's this is how you can identify parts of stories through archetypes that really resonate with the human experience and have throughout history and different cultures and so forth. And it's ways to identify parts of the human psyche and the human experience that come across in stories over and over. So I look at that a lot, but then I also think a lot about how society at different times needs certain archetypes more than others at different times, depending on what's going on in societies, and sometimes it's somewhat cyclical. It's true. So, as an example, I've got the Superman playing back behind me and stuff like that. I'll use Superman as an example. In the late '70s, well, even before that, let's go back to Superman's creation. Okay, being created at the end of the Depression era. So people needed an escape. People needed hope. And even though Superman wasn't created straight out of the box, as we've said, as the truth, justice, and the American way, all of the DNA for the character was there. And he was created as that great escape that, and people responded to it. And of course, with the radio shows, with the Fleischer animations and so forth, he very quickly became our iconic Superman of the truth, justice, and the American way that we know and love, and stayed that way for decades. I mean, practically a century, almost a century, before, again, DC started to try to mandate editorial changes, and then a bunch of idiots in Hollywood and Warner Brothers decided to try to change things up, Zack Snyder and so forth. But he came about at a time when history needed him. And then you look at his history and you see certain incarnations that really stuck in culture, going all the way back. We're not going to cut into every historical era, but certainly George Reeves's incarnation of the character on television in the 50s. I mean, this is after World War II, so we really need some hope. We really need just to look up and see a brighter tomorrow. In the late '70s, when the Christopher Reeve film, the Richard Donner film with Christopher Reeve first came out, this was wonderful because now the late '70s were a time, if you look at the types of media that came out, the American culture really needed they needed some optimism. They needed, we're going into the '80s, and there was a lot of optimism, for the '80s. We're hoping things will be better, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you were on. And we needed a lot of hope. The '60s and even early '70s had given us a lot of discontent with the government, again, earned or unearned, however you see it or whatever. But media, Hollywood reflected that. So you had a lot of more dire, more bleak. Even George Lucas himself, his first movie was very bleak. And it was a conscious choice for him to turn around and do Star Wars, which is something that was going to bring hope and be the hero's journey, and so forth. So the late '70s, there you had Star Wars, you had Superman, you had a bunch of other movies in the start of franchises that really just stuck with culture and blossomed into staples for decades after that. It's interesting. Superman, right before 9/11. So 2000. What was 9/11? 2002. I always get the numbers wrong. But right before 9/11, a little bit before that, they were actually working on the development for the series Smallville, on the WB is what it was called before it changed to the CW. And a lot of critics, TV critics and whatnot, and a lot of people just talking about it in general in Hollywood or on the I guess bulletin boards or forums, whatever incarnation of the internet, was it had back then. A lot of people were saying, this is ridiculous. Aren't we past this little goody two-shoe mom and pop shop American apple pie? This is ridiculous. Why would you be telling a story about this? Because the story too was not a Superman story in space or anything like that, but Clark Kent when he was just growing up in Smallville. Smallville, really focusing on where he got all of these homespun values, America, middle America values, that made him the American way, truth, justice, and the American way. So a lot of people were thinking, what in the world? Why would you even develop something like this now? This is ridiculous. And you think about what was going on at the culture, turn of the century, there was just the scare of 2000 of that. There was the the election when George W. Bush first came into office. A lot of people were contesting that, and there was all kind of discontent about this or that. Then 9/11 happened, and a lot of people, even those of us who lived through it, it can be a little hard to remember sometimes, because eventually there was such a visceral push in culture against the Bush administration and the war on terror, and all this kind of stuff, especially from the woke Hollywood or liberal Hollywood, however you want to say it, applied back then. But it can be hard to remember that there was an immense swelling of patriotism, and across the lines, we are one as America, right after 9/11, which didn't last comparatively long, is the backlash eventually that came after, but it was very strong, and it was very formational in a lot of ways. And overnight, the response to this Smallville show became, oh my gosh, we need this. We need this so bad right now. We need a good, wholesome series. Superman, come back and save us again. Our culture needs you again, And in Smallville, of course, I still think it's a great show. It has a lot of problems, of course. It's a teeny bopper melodrama. That's the genre of it, that sort of weekly CW kind of teeny bopper thing. But they really did respect the heart of Superman. They really respect the Donner years. They pull. The show went on too long and so forth. We can pick it apart all day, but at the end of the day, if you're a Superman fan, it's darn fun to watch. And a lot of those episodes are just classic, and great casting, So I really liked the show quite a bit, for what it was. I think it could have been a lot worse, and I think it was really great that they respected the franchise and the character so much. Similar to like Lois and Clark before that. Again, a very different type of genre for the show and for the franchise. 90s kind of primetime LA Law-ish kind of, take on it, but wonderful. And, you might have had to put up with Superman not having the spit curl or whatever. It was still really good. And that's not the case with incarnations lately. So we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so post 9/11, it was about time for another Superman movie, especially in 2009 when Superman Returns came out. I think it was 2009. In Superman Returns, I will never stop saying, yes, it made horrible choices as a Superman movie. It was the absolute unquestioned wrong direction to go for a Superman movie. There are things in that movie that are unforgivable for being a Superman movie, 100%. That being said, it is a very well done, artistically made film. And there are wonderful, iconic, amazing Superman moments about it. You never want to have a story where Superman just left Earth. You'd have to do a lot more than that movie did to really justify anything like that. But being that he did leave Earth and he came back, that scene, after he, catches the airplane, that was all amazing and everything. But landing in that baseball diamond with people, and there's a moment, when he catches the plane, sets it down, and he goes inside to see if everybody's out, and he comes back out and he's staring at everybody. And there's that moment of, okay, is he going to be accepted again? Because this is a very different world. The movie doesn't mention 9/11, but this is a post 9/11 America now. And in the film, even though he's been gone for so many years or whatever. And there's that moment where there's silence, and it is, can we still believe in hope like we once did as a culture? That's one of the things that the movie asked, one of the questions. And there's that moment, and then in no time at all, the whole stadium just erupts in cheers. Yes, desperately, thank you for return. We needed you. We needed hope. We needed our Superman. This is our hero. He's back to save us. We need hope. And it was a wonderful thing. Again, for all the problems in that movie, it had some really amazing scenes like that just really got it, And that was great. But, of course, the film dropped the ball in a lot of ways. So, it wasn't the real return of Superman to our culture that we needed. And then fast forward a few years more, and you get, pardon my French, Zack Dumbass Snyder. I just, I have no patience for people who try to defend this man and the assassination that he perpetuated on Superman as a character, as a mythological, you know, it, it's just it's ridiculous what he did. And you can look at scenes from his garbage movies that he put a character he called Superman in and see the public's reaction. And that's a nihilistic take on it. No, but yeah, some people really liked him in Superman or in Batman v Superman. Did they? I mean, I know that we're supposed to believe they did, and that's part of like the problem, you know, or whatever. No, even the people that were supposedly liking him were like, just like, they were like Stockholm syndrome, you know, kind of people. They just like, they were so shocked and devoid of all emotion from their circumstances. They just reached out to this one guy that they thought might be able to help them. Maybe. I mean, it's awful. It was awful. Everything about that film was awful. Deconstructed the snot out of Superman. It is encouraging to see the fact that that universe finally did just die. The Snyderverse is gone, folks. It'll never come back. The Snyder Bros are still, you know, knuckle dragging around trying to make a hoo-ha about it or whatever, but it's just not coming. It's not coming back, and it never will. And good riddance to it. It needs to die and forever be forgotten. Because of that, though, because that it muddied up Superman so much, and we desperately needed that paragon archetype, you know, because that's what Superman is. He's the aspirational hero, and he's our paragon. He's the aspirational paragon. You need aspirational paragons in culture, and we went through a time where people were just trying to tear down our aspirational paragons one after the other. You know, whether it's Optimus Prime or He-Man or Superman, Luke Skywalker, you know, whatever paragon you tend to resonate with most, chances are they were trying to tear them down at one point and deconstruct them. So now we're seeing a lot of people just willing to settle for any incarnation that seemingly gives us that aspect of Superman back, his hopefulness, his ability to come in and save. And so people are always, and I'll come back to these in a moment, but people are always trying to tell me, no, prof, you're wrong about my adventures with Superman. You're wrong about Superman and Lois. Those are actually really, because they see steps in the right direction. Admittedly, they see really great steps in the right direction from those incarnations, and suddenly they're willing to, you know, throw it all down. It's like, these are the people that, you know, if Superman Returns came out today instead of back then, they'd be all in on it because, you know, whatever, problems aside, you know, they're willing to take what they can get at this point, which I understand to a certain degree because we need Superman back so badly. And again, I'm going to go into, there's another aspect of this that I'm going to round this out with here in a second. But, you know, we don't know yet, even though I have zero faith in James Gunn as a Superman storyteller. It's not the franchise for him. He said the most idiotic things about it already. There's zero faith in him for that. But we don't know, right? Who knows? You know, what if it came out and was great? Maybe. But the thing is, like, people are just, I just see everybody willing to settle. So it's gotten to the point where it doesn't matter what kind of Superman film it is. I already know people are going to go champion it as the next great thing. Even though some of the silly signs have come in the casting already. For a lot of the casting's pretty great, but you'll never ever see a white Perry White again. Now, is that a bad thing? Is that a deal breaker in and of itself? Like, does Jimmy Olsen or Perry White have to be white? Not necessarily, but those little changes are part of a bigger agenda, and it's part of just turning the heat up, the frog in the pot, just slowly turning the heat up. Well, hey, look, there's nothing objectively wrong with a little salt in the water. What's wrong? Hey, it's actually good for your skin. So just, you know, take that. It's okay. Hey, don't be silly. You can't just object to me putting a little bit of spices in the water you're in. There's nothing, you know, objectively wrong with that. So, okay, so we're okay with that. Okay, yeah, okay, look over there while I turn the heat up just a little bit more. You know, that's what it is. Eldritch fan 999, thank you so much there. So I've been watching vids of the Batman the Animated Series creators. They said they weren't bound by comic canon and cherry-picked the best. They ended up reinventing characters like Two-Face and Mr. Freeze for the better. Yeah, and the series, of course, created Harley Quinn. And the thing about that is, I'm glad you point that out because, you know, people always try and tell me when I talk about the problems with the Snyderverse or something, oh, but Professor, you know that in the comics, Superman killed once too, right? I mean, that's not your just as you say, as you point out to, or as you allude to, the Eldritch fan, that's not the canon. That's not the measure by which you call the iconic nature of these characters. You don't just point at the comics, and if it happened once in the comics, then it was great. A lot of writers did a lot of stupid things with Superman in the comics. Just because it was in the comics once doesn't make it part of the iconic character. What makes it part of the iconic character is things that have been tried that stuck, that culture said yes to. So, like when the change came for Superman to actually fly instead of just leap tall buildings in a single bound, that worked. People accepted that. That became part of the character. You know, when John Byrne created, and this isn't even, John Byrne did some stupid things. He also did some glorious things, but this is sort of a in between, like whatever. He had a thing in his run where if a cloth was against Superman's skin, it couldn't be cut. So that's how his suit would survive all these things. His cape could be in tatters because that was floating off of him, but if a cloth was next to his skin, it couldn't be cut. I mean, points for creativity, but that's kind of silly. Just make the cloth from the ship, and make it sort of a Kryptonian nature too, or something, so little things like that don't survive, some do. And yeah, you're right. The creator, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Alan Barnett, and so forth. They did pick. Now the thing is that they had strong writers on that show. It used to be that we thought Bruce Timm was the genius behind that show. He was the one who gave us these such iconic portrayals of these characters, and it's just come to light that no, that's not the case at all. Bruce Timm was willing to sell out these characters in a heartbeat. He'd crap all over them, as he tried to do many times when he came back to the animated universe and tried to make all these stupid movies. Paul Dini, I think, was really the saving grace, and maybe some other writers who were there too that really kept these characters going. I mean, Paul Dini is behind the great, I think, Mr. Freeze and Two-Face ones they did there, but certainly the creation of Harley Quinn and all the little changes they did. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good way to just kind of clarify that, it's not all about what was in the comics necessarily. Okay, so where was it? All right, so we like this we're tracing this example, this progression of Superman through the ages, and replying and responding in many ways to culture and what we need him to be. There's a really great quote, maybe I should say here. Yeah, there it is. This was a meme that I made that I when I was doing my old Iconic Superman tab. If you listen to the our Iconic Superman Facebook page, if you listen to my first episode of the Iconic Cast podcast from the other day, I actually did talk about this, the Iconic Superman page and everything. But this was one of the memes that I've made, and I'm sharing a quote. Well, it's Alvin Schwartz originally said it, but this is paraphrased in a book by Tom DeHaven. It says, spurious versions, fundamentally wrong-headed premises can and often do prevail from time to time. But eventually the character, Superman himself, Tulpa Superman, will somehow resist and reverse that meddling, reconstituting himself in the world as he means to be. And that is so very true, as we've seen throughout the decades of the character, the century of the character now, as we can say, I think, or close to it anyway.